Hi, and welcome to the OrgDev podcast. We're really delighted to have Nate Price-Whittle join us today. Nate is Associate Director of the Workforce Practice in the People Consulting area of KPMG. Nate has had a really successful career to date that's had the NHS at the heart of it throughout. So prior to being at KPMG, Nate was at King's College Hospital NHS Foundation Trust, and he was Deputy Director of Workforce and Director of OD. Now, I first met Nate when he was Head of Organisational Development and Wellbeing at Imperial College, and I think he was probably one of the most busiest people I knew at the time. He had 5 portfolios of, is it leadership, engagement, OD, recognition, and wellbeing. So he's had he's had a really interesting career, and it's just been constantly about making significant and meaningful change in the organisations in which he works. He also is studying somehow for a doctorate in evidence-based practice at Birkbeck College, and prior to that he had an MSc in business and occupational psychology as well. So in amongst all that incredibly busy career, for relaxation, if you call it relaxation, he has a volunteering role as Deputy People and Culture Director for Pride in London, which is such an important event and is getting more and more important as time goes by. And last year he trained over 200 people on the day, volunteers for Pride Day, to make sure it worked well and it was safe. And if that wasn't enough, there's so much stuff in here, and there's so much stuff that's going to come out during our conversation. He's also recently added a new addition to his family with a new puppy called Oriole, which we're told may make an appearance to our conversation today. Is that right, Nate?
He may do. He's by my feet at the moment asleep, but can't guarantee I'll have that for the full end of time. So if he does make an appearance, I'll bring him on screen.
It'll be our
It'll
first
be the
puppy
standout.
appearance.
It'll be the highlight of the episode, I promise.
He'll have an agent by the time he's finished.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us.
No, thank you for having me.
Welcome, Nate. It's lovely to have you with us.
Like, this is your life at the beginning, isn't it? You sort of.
Do you know, people say it does feel a bit like that when they do these podcasts. They're kind of reliving their careers.
But this is we went easy. There's a few things we've edited out. Like it's just there's just the phenomenal amount of output that you do is quite something, and we want to understand a little bit more about how you manage it, don't we, Danny?
We do, yeah. So just to kick us off, just start with an easy one. Just tell us a bit about your role. What does your role involve?
I'm at KPMG, and I've been at KPMG now for coming up to a year. It's absolutely flown past, and made the leap out of being in an kind of service role, internal role in an organisation into consulting. So I now have the real privilege of working with a bunch of kind of very inspiring people, some who have been at KPMG for quite a while, and others who have had a health and industry background to kind of work with clients in really meaningful ways, particularly around the people agenda, be that some of the harder end things relating to workforce around kind of pay and terms and conditions and org design, through to culture, well-being, and organisational development, and go all the whole span of the kind of the people profession and what you'd expect from a workforce practice. So very lucky to kind of work with a range of different clients, and yeah, kind of really do interesting, meaningful work to help support organisations with their needs relating to kind of workforce and people agenda. So really enjoying it. It's been a really interesting transition as you'd expect. But yeah, lots of really great things that we get to do, which is really exciting.
Brilliant. And are your clients healthcare or kind of a mix of sectors?
The bulk are within healthcare, which has been a kind of lovely home away from home to kind of continue working and supporting kind of, healthcare organisations in the NHS in particular, but also a couple of other parts of different sectors, including finance, other government bodies. So a kind of nice mix, but in the main, still very much part of the health family, really. So yeah, mostly health.
Fab. And you talked about that transition from kind of working in the NHS to now being at KPMG. How's that been for you? What have been the biggest kind of insights or challenges?
Do you know, we've had this thing in the NHS where you can never find a spoon to kind of stir your drink. You're kind of using the end of a pen or something to kind of stir your drink, and you can't ever find any of those things. So one of the things that has been the biggest change in going to something like KPMG is these big corporate offices where you've kind of got, your tea and your coffee and all those sorts of things that you just don't get when you're working in a hospital, where you're just trying to find, somewhere to have a drink, somewhere to, to do that. And that actually has been quite a big transition to move from, Victorian hospital building, aircon's not a thing that exists. You've got windows that don't open properly, and all of those things, into moving to kind of quite a different Canary Wharf glass building environment. It's been quite odd to not be in a hospital and not be around patients, and in that context, there are of course lots of lovely things that come with moving in that way. But the biggest thing that surprised me is actually how culturally aligned I would say that the team in particular at KPMG are with the NHS and with our kind of health clients. That has been much less of a shock than I'd expected. So KPMG talks a lot about its values, and I think when I first joined, I probably thought, oh, it's probably lip service, or perhaps it's not really stuck up on the wall and all those sorts of things. But actually, it's taken very, very seriously, and there's lots of really important discussions that are happening around our values at KPMG, which is what I experienced working in the NHS. And that kind of desire to want to do work that matters, to do work that supports people, has been much less of a kind of cultural shock than I'd expected, and people just being really generous with their time and supportive and onboarding you and all of that stuff. So I think, the NHS, if you've been in it for a long time, kind of stays with you. If you probably cut me in half, you probably still see the NHS running through me like a stick of rock. But I think the transition from a kind of culture and ways of working perspective has been kind of much softer and much more supportive than perhaps I'd expected going into consulting originally.
How has it been sort of switching from sort of owning the internal change agenda to actually supporting the organisations actually achieving the agenda? How has that been in terms of a transition?
I think it's really opened my eyes to the importance of kind of objectivity and the importance of kind of how you work really well with stakeholders to kind of navigate those difficult situations, or those complex situations you find yourself in. I think it's very easy when you're internal to think, okay, I've got kind of there's one way of doing this, or my way of doing it, and actually you get to really generate new ways of thinking and doing things by putting in lots of different voices to kind of navigate those changes. And that's certainly something that, if I was to make the shift back into an internal role, that I would certainly be much more considered and considerate around the kind of the stakeholder engagement piece, and making sure that we've got lots of voices around dealing with change, dealing with difficult issues in the work environment. So that's certainly been one of the key things that I've noticed for sure.
That's fascinating. Yeah, we're going to ask you a lot more questions about that. And I guess just for everyone that's watching today, obviously we've just touched upon your career highlights, but what has been the thread that's been through your journey into OD, or has there been a thread? Is it just like sort of lots of interesting opportunities?
So I think this is where I've had certainly some influential people who have kind of really led me into the world of OD, having seen the work that they do and just being truly inspired by it. So, started out a kind of generalist HR role. I was one of those odd people that kind of went to university thinking I'd like to do HR, which I don't think many people do, and thought I'm probably really into originally some of the recruitment side of things, the employer branding side of things, and then did a bit of time in employee relations, and then sort of found this thing sort of over there that was OD, where people were kind of really wanting to make improvements to the experience of staff in the organisation, how things worked, improvements through people. And I met some really great heads of OD in the NHS. And there was a national network, there still is in the NHS, called Do OD. I remember in 2013 going to their first conference and just thinking, oh, this is, I think, what I want to do with the rest of my career. I want to be in this space of really making sure that we are creating great environments for people to work in, and also making sure that across all the spectrum of HR, we've all got a role to play in that. And I suppose I'm a believer that in the people profession, I suppose I tend to use that terminology, HR and OD I think should go hand in hand. They're all parts of how we make the best use of our people, support our people to be really effective in our organisations. So it kind of saw it over there, and I think it needs to come much more closely with the wider kind of workforce remit and portfolio. So I think I've been very lucky to have some really good mentors who also, I think, in OD play a really important role just to help you navigate some of the language, the terminology that's used. I mean, I remember, starting not really understanding this kind of magical thing that seemed to be OD, and kind of what was it that people were doing? What were the tools they were using, the approaches they were using? What is diagnostic, dialogic, and all of those sorts of terminology that I was just thinking, this is like a kind of magical dark arts. But breaking that down and just ultimately a really great definition that a friend used was, OD is, business improvement through people. That's it ultimately, and you're looking at ways to, help organisations be better through their people. So I think mentorship has been one of the key things that's helped me kind of enter and navigate a career in OD.
Wow, God, I wish I'd met you when I was coming through with OD, because it's true. It feels like sometimes one of the drivers behind this podcast is to sort of unveil the black box that is OD, and it's beautifully elegant and simple in terms of what it's trying to do, but there's just like this whole world of glossary of language, isn't there?
Yeah.
So how did you actually go find your mentors? Like, what was or did you were these formal mentoring relationships that you had, or just people that you sort of were drawn to and wanted to work alongside?
I think people that, absolutely were drawn to, kind of were really clear around the passion and the commitment that they had for, working with people, supporting people, and also just being really attuned to what was going on in the organization. And I think that's, always so important to kind of have a really good understanding of what the kind of strategic priorities of the organization are, and kind of how do we, through people, help, those things to be delivered. And so actually it felt that really important balance of being about people, but also equally about the organization and support of making sure the organization is successful, and that sort of balance between the hard and soft sides of all of those things. And I don't think, actually reflecting upon it, that I've probably told those individuals how kind of influential they were in my career, which is actually, something that just off this podcast, I will certainly go and do and tell those people the impact that they had, because I don't think that I've ever I've told them that, or really reflected that back to them. And I see them, still continuing to do that and still be really inspiring in the work that they do, and always, wanting to, despite, the challenges that might come working in the NHS, be that kind of funding, political change, patient need, a pandemic, always wanting to strive to do things in a better way for staff and for patients. So yeah, that's something that that kind of recognition and thanks to those individuals is something that I need to go and do.
Brilliant. So you were in HR, then you kind of sort of got immersed in the world, and DOD, the work, is it Karen Domain and Paul Taylor do some
Paul Taylor,
remarkable work, and that's still going strong today. How did you sort of make that transition into OD? What was your sort of first roles, and how did you sort of cut your teeth on OD projects?
Yeah, so I went for a role that was a fixed term contract as a kind of sort of leadership, an OD consultant. I remember when I sort of saw that word consultant, thinking, what am I consulting on? I haven't got, I don't, who am I to be consulting people on anything? And I sort of realized at that point that actually a lot of what I was then doing was kind of convening spaces for people to kind of talk about and develop ideas together. And that's kind of, what kind of got me really interested in that kind of consulting space. So one of the first things I was doing for the Kent, Surrey and Sussex region in the NHS was setting up an OD network to actually bring OD practitioners together to kind of share ideas, support each other. It can be quite lonely, particularly if you are the one OD person in an organization, or you've got OD in your job title, but no sort of resource to deliver an OD function. It just feels like the right, indeed, absolutely. So bringing those people together to share ideas, to collaborate, where you've got individuals that are perhaps skilled in a particular intervention, how can they be deployed to help support people in other organizations? And I just remember being surrounded by these individuals thinking, oh God, these are all really great and talented and experienced individuals. What am I doing here? Well, actually, what I was doing was creating a space to help that kind of happen, and that sharing of information, and I think that's kind of where I got really into kind of networks and communities of practice and the kind of impact and the support that they can bring. Coaching then, became something that was I could see the benefits in others of coaching, and I was very lucky to be supported to do a coaching qualification earlier on in my career. And it's really interesting, as part of that process, I had to coach, when you're doing your kind of practice coaching, a chair of an organization, and feeling quite intimidated by that. And at the end of the process, I sort of opened up and said, "Oh, I was really nervous coaching you. I was thinking, oh, he's going to think, who's this guy that's doing this with me?" And she said, "It's really interesting that you say that. How do you think that makes me feel as the chair of an organization, being told that just by being the chair of an organization, that's quite intimidating, and people are nervous about that, and people don't know how to approach me?" And actually, she sort of reflected that she hadn't really considered that just that sort of status automatically creates a kind of barrier to how open people would be with her, how they might communicate with her. But then also, she said, I'm just I'm a human being. I'm a human being doing a role. I'm a nice person, and I want to, talk to people and speak openly with people. So it was a really interesting moment where I thought about some of the pressures that perhaps leaders face, some of the things that the barriers that they face in kind of being open and visible, and what does that all look like, while also overcoming your own kind of imposter syndrome of supporting individuals who are far more experienced and far more senior than you are. Yeah, some of those initial things, particularly around leadership, particularly around coaching, particularly around communities of practice, is kind of where I started in the world of OD. And I think, on reflection, I probably didn't realize at the time that in some of those more other parts of the workforce portfolio I was in, perhaps around business partnering and within employee relations, I hadn't realized actually that they're all aspects of OD. Getting our kind of policies and processes and practices right, and boarding people in the right way, is all part of a kind of OD spectrum or continuum. Sorry, both those words are quite cringe, but you know what I mean. Kind of that sort of remit of OD. And I probably hadn't realised it at first. And I don't think many people realise that they probably are doing OD in a range of different ways. It's just perhaps not in the kind of formal kind of OD bracket, really. So yeah, that's kind of how I moved into it.
Brilliant. And then you've sort of taken on sort of more sort of leadership roles within OD as well. What was your sort of your first leadership role, and how did you get? Because we're also interested about how people get started. Like when you move into a role, how do you begin? How do you contract? How do you understand what the task is, and how do you engage with your stakeholders or your clients?
My first transition into a kind of leadership role was when I joined an NHS organisation that was going through a lot of kind of difficult change and shift, and it was a kind of head of learning and development role, having been, I guess, a standalone practitioner to going into managing a team. And I won't sugarcoat it. It was hard, really hard. And my first day, it was not a typical first day, but I arrived in the organisation and there was sort of no one there to kind of to greet me. I sort of knew roughly where I was going to be working, where my office was, and it turns out
all
that
this build up, all this, oh my god, what's it going to be like?
yeah. And
Oh,
on a day, a member of the team sadly had been taken very unwell and was actually in the hospital as a patient. So people were, as you can imagine, quite rightly dealing with all of that. And then 11 o'clock in the morning, my boss came in and said, "Oh, now you're here. I should probably let you know that I'm retiring, and actually I'm going to be leaving at the end of the week. I just kind of had to stay on until you were here." And so I was, and I was relatively young at the time. I think I was 26 or 27, kind of now heading up an important function in an organization with sort of no real senior leadership support, a team that was going through quite a difficult time. And I do remember looking out the window on the Friday of my first week thinking, "Oh, what have I done? What have I done? I've not made the right decision here." And what I kind of started to do then was just meet with all of the team individually and just start to understand the background, the history. There was a lot they felt they needed to tell me, a lot of kind of historical stuff that they needed to kind of get off their chest and talk to me about that. And I kind of really wanted to make space for that. There'd been a lot of kind of churn and managers that hadn't been around for a while, and just thinking, okay, I think a big part of my role here is actually not about doing the technical work of what we need to do as an organization, learning and development. It made me realize very quickly that actually the head of bit of my role is probably more important. I've got a team that I now need to support, to manage, to help me deliver the work that we need to do as an organization. And my priorities changed from being, okay, what we need to do in the first 100 days is sort out induction. We need to make sure that our kind of Statman training is we're all compliant with what we need to do. We need to do a learning needs analysis for the organisation. Actually, first thing I need to do is just understand the roles and remits of the team that I've got. What support do they need so that we can be effective? And how do I blend those two together? Because there was a lot of work that we needed to do in the team while making sure the team could function. And I think I sort of realised then that you're sort of then having to do OD within your own kind of team, really, and it helps support them and navigate them through the significant change that we're going to be going through. So I think I realized quite quickly that when you're in a leadership role, both in a sort of as a subject matter expert or in a team that's got a particular, actually as much of it is clearly just about how you are as a leader and how you act in that role, as well as the kind of the technical competence that you've got in the profession that you're in. And learning that quite quickly, I think, was really important and helped me, I think, be a much more effective manager and leader as a result of that. And also, I think, equipped me really well for joining new organisations and just thinking, okay, so what are some of the things that can go wrong quite quickly? What are some of the issues that you face, and how do you deal with that in a way that's sort of resilient but prepares you for where things don't go as smoothly as you might hope they might do going into the role.
It's fascinating, and you're kind of touching on something which is a bit of an endemic issue within organisations, isn't it? Which is subject matter experts that find themselves in management roles, and it sounds like in that moment you're almost acting intuitively, which is like no one's said you need to triage the team. You could have easily got focused on the 100-day commitment you've made to actually get the role, but a lot of subject matter experts, they don't know what to do, and it therefore compounds the issue almost, isn't it? Organizations sometimes don't support their managers enough, do they?
I mean, you're absolutely right, and I think that probably made me realize, and I suppose a lot of work that I've gone on to do since in organizations has really been about championing and supporting the line manager, who fundamentally sit in this often incredibly difficult position, navigating what's below them and what's above them and how all of that comes together. And actually, I just remember sitting in my office, door closed, thinking, I don't know how I'm going to do this. And actually, there will be loads of managers thinking about that and what support are we giving them and how are we equipping them to do that and manage that effectively. Yeah, so I totally hit on something there, and certainly makes me think about those sort of lonely moments where you're thinking, I feel very much on my own here. Where can I get support, and how can I be honest? I've just joined a new organization and I'm struggling. How can I be honest about that without people thinking, oh god, that was a mishire, wasn't it, and this isn't going to work out very well, and sort of having to kind of put a face on that when you're really thinking.
I was going to say, it's a huge amount of pressure, isn't it, when you start a new role, that you feel like you need to prove yourself. So really, really challenging.
Yeah, we had Dr. Hayley Lewis on last week. You'll know her through Birkbeck, and she was sort of talking very graphically about her own experiences, wasn't she, of being in that bunker moment when it feels like the world is closing in, and how do you get that support through it as well, and how you need your support network. It's not just you alone, isn't it? And that support network is not necessarily a team, and it's not necessarily a line manager. It's a whole group of people to pull you through it, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think in that scenario, I was lucky to have a new manager that came in who certainly was a very supportive individual, but also just we played together on our skill sets of her helping to kind of manage the political pressure in the organisation around the work that we needed to do while we got things on track and got things moving, so that at least we're sort of combining our efforts in managing both what the organisation needs, what the team needs, and how we navigate that to get to a really positive outcome, which we did. Which was, I look back at that experience now, and for all of the times it was very challenging, it was really foundational in terms of the experience that I had of both being a manager and also working in an organisation and supporting them through their OD challenges.
Now we decided that we wanted to have you as a guest on ages and ages ago. We were just picking the right moment, and one of those moments is because you started at King's College Hospital, and you could almost sort of see like how you were sort of setting a strategy to do the things that you needed to do to build the fundamentals to sort of build the capability in the organization to move it forward. How is that sort of starting there? Because it's, for those people that don't know, what is the sort of size and scale of King's College Hospital?
So King's it's a £1 billion turnover organisation. It's 14,000 staff across 5 major hospitals in South Central London. So it's funny when you sort of see people talk about jobs outside of the NHS. They talk about complexity. That's pretty complex, and to navigate an OD and learning kind of offer and team across an organisation that is has been in difficult financial special measures from a regulatory perspective has been difficulty at times, and staff survey results that are not always glowing in all areas. To navigate that and to kind of think about how we respond to that is not straightforward. And I was very lucky to have a chief people officer that gave me a lot of kind of autonomy and freedom to kind of think that through and navigate that. And one thing that was immediately clear was that we were just not doing enough of a good job in articulating what we were doing in the organization, because actually there's so many things that were in place available to staff, particularly from a learning development perspective, that we were just not communicating well, be that via our LMS and how accessible and easy was that to find. The way that we were delivering training, it's a lot of kind of in person, in the classroom events that were happening. Actually, kind of where's our kind of online just in time offering there? What's our OD consultancy service, and all of that stuff. And we created something called King's Kaleidoscope, which was kind of when I sort of realised the importance of articulating and offer to staff in the organisation, helping them really understand at particular moments in their career, where can they access the support that they need, and what does that look like, and how is that kind of multimodal and all of those sorts of things. And it can be you want to offer as much as you can and everything that you can, but you sort of really need to sense check and kind of curate what's working well in the organisation, where you've got gaps, and also where things are going really, really well, and what you want to major on and focus on as a trust. So it was a big kind of leap into that role, because I also then moved into kind of being in a senior workforce team, having much more exposure to the exec and other kind of senior issues that were going on in the organisation. And like I said, was lucky to have a good workforce team that of colleagues around me, and also have 3 really good individuals leading the team underneath me that kind of made me look good, and did a really incredible job navigating all the things that they had to do in support of the work that we wanted to undertake at King. So big leap, but really positive experience, I think, for curating and articulating what we were doing for staff.
One thing I wanted to ask, so when you're working anywhere, there's only limited OD resources. You've only got a limited team, but the demand and need for OD is infinite. How do you manage that tension? What do you do to deploy your resources, people, as effectively as you can?
So this makes me smile, because I think of the conversations that I would have with members of the OD team who really wanted to be out in the organisation, supporting wherever and whenever they could, and getting lots of different requests for things that for support that was needed. And it kind of drew that right back to thinking we need to have an evidence base for the work that we're going to do in OD. And one of the things that the NHS does, it has an annual staff survey, and that provides a really rich insight into helping us think through areas that need particular support and challenge. it's so easy for there to be lots of corridor commissioning of, please, will you help my team out? And oh, we'd really love just this one thing. And invariably, it's never just this one thing. You uncover a whole bunch of things, and it's hard to step away from that offer of support once you've given it. And so I guess from an OD perspective, we just started to be kind of really disciplined around where we get asks for support. We probably need to establish a bit of a framework that just sense checks, where are they in the staff survey? Where are they in some of their other indicators around sickness, around turnover? What's the data we've got that suggests this is an area that needs priority support? And what are the kind of levels that we have to support that? So there was a bit of, on the shelf, here's a team diagnostic, here's a way of running a meeting, here's if you want to have a away day to think through what your priorities are, here are some tools to do that. Give us a ring, we'll talk to you about it for kind of 10-15 minutes, and then off you go, let us know how you get on. Then you've got that kind of more of an intervention, which is probably something that's contracted around a few different interventions, conversations with staff, probably putting in colleagues from health and wellbeing, equality, diversity and inclusion to kind of create more of a bespoke OD offer. And then there's that, what do we actually need some long-term investment in, where we know we've got some particular challenges, and being in a position to go to the exec and go to senior leaders and say, this is the need that's out there, this is what we're being asked to do, and actually having to be able to start to say no to people. We can't help, not because we desperately don't want to, not because we can't, but just because physically, and with the resource that we've got available to us. And that's never an easy position, because I think invariably OD people want to help, want to support. But I think having that kind of mixed levels of kind of getting access to help and support, but also us being in a position when the team are saying we haven't got the resource that we need, well, we need to be able to articulate, the request that we've got coming in, and just being much more disciplined around all of that, and not just saying, oh, I had a chat, I've got an email, we need to now do this OD intervention. Actually, what sits behind all of that, and what's the resource that we need to do it effectively, both in support of the team and in support of the organisation that need our help.
About resourcing people to do their own OD in effect, isn't it? And getting them used to being more independent, but with that support in the background. How did people respond to that? Did it take time for them to get the confidence to do the things using the tools?
So absolutely. And I think what we started to do is look at how we developed something called, I guess, our values ambassadors, which were individuals within the organisation that really cared about the culture of King's, embedding our values of kind, respectful team. And so we identified those individuals, and we took them through a kind of train the trainer session, where we started to give them some tools that they could then apply within their teams. Things that were kind of safe to do, things that were, aligned to the priorities of what the team was looking for help and support with. So it wasn't something that was left field, or people that wasn't surprising to people. And then kind of building that community of individuals that can help and sense check with each other, and they also feel invested in. And I think that's kind of where I would have, if I was still at King's, we would have kind of continued on that journey, which is to kind of build OD capacity within teams, with managers, working in partnership with them, and just kind of building that capability across the organisation. And I know the OD team at King's continues to go from strength to strength, and I think is now in a really kind of robust position with that framework in mind to deliver the work really effectively, but in a way that's safe and healthy to do so, as I say, that supports the team and the organisation.
Because you can achieve some amazing results, can't you? Because at its essence, often about organisation development is about looking up and looking around and seeing things, on an enterprise scale almost. And people are often just doing. So they're implementing a process, or they're finishing a task and then metaphorically thrown over the wall to the next to the next team or whatever. When people do actually start to embed a little bit of an OD mindset in their day-to-day work, remarkable things can often happen, can't they?
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that we've noticed, apart from the sort of improvement in kind of staff experience and kind of how things are working, is also just the freedom and innovation that kind of comes from being able to kind of, as you say, look up and out, start to really think through what's the art of the possible, what could we be doing in this service, what could we be doing to help support our patients in new and different ways. So we know we've got this organisational strategy. We feel much more equipped as a team to respond to that proactively and think through what does that mean for us and how are we going to deliver that. It all feels much more kind of inspired, innovative, and forward thinking, which is really kind of really leaves you thinking that you've made the biggest impact, because not only there are you then supporting the team and the individuals, but the organization's now much more effective and able to deliver what it needs to, and particularly when you're working in healthcare and your primary reason is to support patients in the best possible way. And when you start to see that shift in patient experience and how the service is thinking about its patients, which it can do far more effectively when the team's much more effective, it's unbelievably powerful and rewarding to kind of see that and be part of that in some way.
So when you think about success in your role, how do you measure it? What are the measures of success for you?
Oh, that's a brilliant question. I think for me, in the role that I'm in now, obviously, it's really important that we get really good kind of feedback on the work that we're doing. And I think when we start to see the shift, particularly for the client, in asking themselves the questions that we might be asking them, when we start to see that shift in the pace of the work that they're doing, the way they're thinking about things, how they start to think about the art of the possible and perhaps be more creative and innovative about the work that they do, that's obviously really important and incredibly rewarding. There are, of course, some tangible things around winning work and all of that, the kind of stuff that you might expect in this sort of role. But in the roles I was in previously in the NHS, I think a key measure of success, there's some tangible things there around staff survey results and what are people saying about their experience of working in the organisation. But when you do really good work with a team and you sort of can leave them, in a way what you want is for them to no longer need you. I suppose you eventually kind of want to be made redundant by either equipping the team or working with them to overcome some of the challenges that they're facing. And I think for some of our care groups or directorates or teams that we've worked with, there have been times when we've started work with them and thought, this is going to be long, this is going to be challenging, but 18 months later stepping away and saying, oh, they're thriving, they're kind of doing, living their best life as it were, and don't need us anymore. That's a really important measure of success for us. And then just that ongoing relationship and checking in, how are things going, and just continuing to be that partner by their side. But I think ultimately when people no longer need you, and then I think finally just on kind of that point, where you start to see organisations take OD seriously. So when I think about at King's, we weren't externally commissioning things anymore. We was, the OD team was running the exec away days, was running coaching sessions, was doing the doing of OD and being trusted to do that. I think is the sort of biggest measure of success, when people are saying, actually, we don't need to commission outside anymore. We've got an OD team and we know that they're capable and confident and able to do the work, but they've got capacity too. So let's make the most of our resource. That's and certainly at Imperial and certainly at King's, that's certainly where things were. And of course, there are times when external support is entirely appropriate and right for a whole host of reasons. But actually, when first and foremost people want to speak to OD, talk to OD, and get support, that's a massive measure of success for me.
Wow, I've got 3 questions on the back of that. so question one is, because you've got a unique view that not many people have. You've seen both sides. So what are the ingredients of a really effective sort of client consulting relationship? What is that sort of spark that helps it work really well?
I think being able to be really open and honest with each other, and being able to build relationships quickly is really important. If I think about some of the engagements that I'm on now, where you genuinely feel part of the team in a really important way, so you are able to speak openly, honestly, challenge around pace, challenge around the work that's happening, being able to work with them in a really kind of constructive way, I think, is the most important thing. Helping them draw out in themselves what they already know and making sure that you're adding value, not doing work that you know they can do or they just need some guidance and support on. But I think ultimately having that underpinning relationship where you can be open and honest about the things you're seeing, what you're experiencing, and ways that you can support them, and having kind of frank conversations around that is sort of where the magic happens, because I suppose that's where you're able to really drive things more quickly, or be more transformational in the work that you need to do. So certainly having a really good, strong relationship is crucial.
Brilliant. And then just some quick fire questions for you. So no one very rarely picks up the phone and goes, right, I need some OD. Like, how do you educate clients so they know what to ask for almost, rather than I need a Nate conversation?
So one of the things that we did at Imperial, and we what we wanted to do was just bring managers awareness to the fact that they have such a major role in people's experience. And I'm a big fan of Eurovision. So we did this thing called Engage a Vision. I couldn't help myself, where basically we brought managers into the room as part of a session that we were doing, and we kind of made them decide from nil pois to douze pois what are the reasons why people were leaving this organization. Kind of, London calling and all of that stuff. Kind
I
of
love
got
it.
a bit. You can just imagine it, can't you? And ultimately, the 12 points, the main reason why people are leaving the organization is because of their relationship with their line manager, and that's what we're seeing through our exit interviews. And after them having given the 12 points to pay or working conditions, actually, it's about you. And what we're trying to do there is just bring back to my kind of original earlier point around when I entered that role, and I realized how important my line management capability and role was, as well as the technical work that I'm doing, particularly if you're a clinician and that's how you've progressed in your career as a clinician, and now you're a manager and a leader. Making sure that they're thinking through the decisions when they're making decisions, when they're delivering their role, what is their impact on people, and just getting that to be part of what they're thinking about. That doesn't mean they need to start doing OD or coming to talk to us, but they're just aware of the role that they play in people's experience, and how the team's delivering and how effective they are, and just trying to create some new ways to kind of bring that to life for them, using the data and intelligence that we've got through exit interviews and what people are telling us about the reason for leaving, and kind of making them kind of cognizant of that in the work that they're doing. Not everyone loves Eurovision, but yeah, there you go.
No, what a great metaphor. And then last question, I'm going to hand over to Danny, because obviously we're mindful of your time as well. So obviously you've talked about data throughout the conversation today, but obviously you are doing an evidence-based doctorate with Rob Briner, who a lot of people know through his work there. How's that informed your work? Like, because obviously the people profession is endeavouring to be a more evidence-based practice, isn't it?
So I was doing a kind of session with colleagues in KPMG about this just a couple of weeks ago, and I think it's made me really think about the 4 sources of evidence, and actually where people have got individual preferences and strengths and weaknesses around those. Of course, one of the sources is stakeholders, which I mentioned earlier, the important role that they play. Obviously, your internal expertise and what you bring as a practitioner, but then also what's your organisational data telling you? So I guess from an OD perspective, to that earlier point, what are our priorities? What is our kind of data around turnover and stuff? Are they telling us that we need to do? But then also, what's the scientific evidence for what we're wanting to do, what we're saying works? And one of those things, although it wasn't linked to OD necessarily, but in the pandemic, you might remember that when you were going to restaurants and people were kind of taking your temperature to see if you were well enough to come in, there was no evidence base that demonstrated that was an effective way of kind of dealing with the pandemic, but it felt like the right thing to do. People felt a sense of safety if they knew their temperature was being checked and other people's temperature was being checked and they might be ill, so they're not here. But actually, that balance between doing stuff that looks good and when an organization does something and you think, oh, we should probably be doing that. There's a big issue, particularly in the NHS at the moment, around violence and aggression. And you'll probably have seen those posters that go up, particularly on areas like, Transport for London. Don't be horrible to my mum who kind of works, as a train driver or whatever. But actually, there's little evidence, particularly in the healthcare context, to show that things like those posters work. But I've seen recently an increasing number of trusts, kind of one trust does it, then another trust thinks they should do it. Actually, what's the evidence base behind what we're doing, and how confident are we to challenge what we're doing? And of course, what evidence-based practice is all about, really. It's not about being totally concrete in the decisions that you're making and the choices that you're making, or being 100% certain that this will create the right outcome. It's just putting yourself in a position where you're more likely to be impactful, you're more likely to get the outcomes that you need, taking a robust evidence base. And it's much easier to do than you think. Even if you just spent 10 minutes thinking about, what do our stakeholders think, what's our organisational data say, and what might some recent thinking on this topic be, you're more likely to come to a better outcome. So I think a big thing for me is just trying to get people to think about the four sources of evidence, and even just taking just 10 minutes to think about what they're doing and how they're doing it, and is it the right way. Hopefully we can be more evidence-based in our approaches.
Brilliant advice. So just one last question for you, Nate. So learning and development, you've obviously done your doctorate, you've done an MSc. What does investing in your own learning and development look like for you? What do you do day to day, week to week?
So one of the things that I really try and do is follow great people on social media that post lots of really accessible information, be that infographics, be that sketches, and I'm constantly screenshotting and putting into a kind of folder in my phone, stealing basically great things that people are putting, particularly on kind of social media. And again, kind of part my evidence-based hat there for a second, because not all of that is going to be have a robust evidence base behind it. But I like to, given that I spend a lot of time at the moment reading journals and things like that, just some of those quick infographic visual things kind of really speak to me. And increasingly, I'm not just saying this because I'm doing this now, but podcasts, hearing people's conversations around their experiences and kind of what they've lived through and what they bring to bear, I think is just such a powerful way of helping me reflect on how I would act in a situation or what I would do. So I think anything that makes wherever you're getting your kind of content or information from, if it's supporting you and giving you what you need, there should never be any kind of judgment around what people are doing or how they're doing it. I'm not a big book reader. People I think sometimes feel pressured to say I'm reading umpteen books. You've both got wonderful bookshelves behind you. As I say that to two people who clearly enjoy books, but I think there's sometimes can be a bit of a judgment around where people are getting their CPD and learning and development.
Yeah.
And actually getting what you need and getting what's right for you in any format is what matters, really.
Absolutely. It's what works for you, isn't it? There's no point
reading
books or trying to read books if that's not what sparks interest and it's going to excite you. Find the thing that does and do that. Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, Nate, just want to say huge thank you. Literally everything you've shared has been so useful, and particularly for our audience. Like there's just so much learning, guys, and such an interesting story as well. And it feels like it's only kind of half written so far. So we're looking forward to hearing what happens next. And your amazing use of Eurovision as a metaphor is something that we will aspire to as well.
Anything I can do to champion Eurovision is,
I love it.
Yeah,
which is very timely because it's coming soon, isn't it?
It is indeed.
Loving our entry this year.
Yeah.
So some of the things I'm going to take away from the conversation, and I'm sure you're taking things as well, Danny. So just the importance of just creating a space. Often it just creates so much value. It's such a simple thing, but it's about what OD does, isn't it? It's often through simple things, great things happen. Just the importance of mentors, informally, formally, and also the generosity of people as well, that they're very happy to give their time. So be bold and be brave, and don't be shy when you ask for that as well. And the critical role of managers has just come through this, and how organizations often don't support them enough, but they have such an impact, as you're sort of saying, on people's engagement, their well-being, the organization's performance. And really loved what you've said about the importance of being very clear on what the OD offer is to an organisation, and the importance of, it's as important about what you say no to as what you say yes to, and how you can use that to use organisation development at scale and embed it in the roles of people. And then just the final part is just the critical role of data and scientific data to actually challenge some of maybe the shonky myths or unusual traditions that we just abide by but never question but understand. And I don't think I blocked out the temperature bit until you told us that. I remember. What were we doing?
Yeah, exactly.
Danny, what stood out for you?
Yeah, I think you've covered so much of it, but I think the only other thing I think you said that I would highlight is that getting comfortable with OD being temporary scaffolding, and we're there to kind of help people go on and be their own advocates for use OD in their own practice.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much, Nate. We really appreciate it.
No, thank you for having me. It's gone ridiculously quickly. So yeah, thank you for making it such a lovely conversation.
No, thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you. Take care.